Hi, everybody. My name is Grace Smith with the Wise News Network, and we are here with a very special guest today. This is Michael Powell, and he was the reporter and editor for the Cherryville Eagle. How are you doing today?
Fine. How you doing?
Doing pretty well. Thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So let's kind of just jump right in.
Yes, ma'am.
How has your life been since retirement?
Uh, boring and trying to figure out what to do with myself. Literally. I mean, I everything previously, as you know, it was cut and dried. I had a set schedule like we all do. Anybody that's had a job or works in a job, you're going to go in at 8, get off at 5 or whatever. You have an hour for lunch, and that's pretty much it. I'm so anal retentive. I really focused on that. Didn't have to worry too much about what I was going to plan my day out uh, as opposed to a long time back, as you and I have talked about when I was in the Christian rock group that I was in, the old long-haired Jesus music days of the '70s. Again, that day was planned out for me, but we were pretty much on our own. We traveled a lot, but when you're an old, little short, fat guy, little old guy, and you got 2 kids and 6 grandkids, your days are already planned for you. So,
And you've had so many different career choices. I know that you did the Christian rock group. I know that you also reported in Israel. There are so many different cool things that you've done. How does it feel to slow down?
Weird.
Yeah.
Let me address that. As reporting, you said something about reporting in Israel. When we were in Israel in the '70s, that was with the Christian rock group.
Okay.
At that time, I hadn't even actually, to be very honest with you, I hadn't even thought about being a journalist of any shape, form, or fashion. I had a cousin whose name was Bill Powell. He's deceased now, but Bill was the editor of the Louisville Courier Journal, which at that time was a fairly well-known paper, state paper, kind of like the Charlotte Observer or the Nashville Tennessean, whatever. A lot of big cities and states have their own papers that are quote unquote become state oriented papers like the Observer and the Raleigh News Observer. I think those two here in North Carolina probably, at least in my opinion as a journalist, I think those 2 papers are indicative of what you can find or need to know about what's going on in your state and your hometown. Fortunately, when I got a job here in '07 with the Cherryville Eagle, I wasn't planning on being here. And people out there don't take this the wrong way, but wasn't planning on being here more than 3 years. My cousin told me, he said, when you're a newspaper editor, at any given moment, your job is on the line always 24/7. You don't know when you're going to change hands. The paper might change hands. Your business could be bought by somebody, and the new owner could walk in and say, "It's been real. We'll see you later. Here's your parting check. Have a nice life." And you have to be prepared like that mentally, if not, at least if not physically, then at least mentally. That's unfortunately that's the nature of the beast for print journalism when I first got into it. It's a little different now, but and radio and television like what you guys are doing here and podcasts, those are you may disagree with me, but I think those are kind of becoming the hot couture and the hot important thing now. It seems like every time I turn around, of course, I'm an old guy. I'll be 70 years old this year. And when I got into journalism in the '90s and the mid '70s, early '80s, um, I couldn't even conceptualize of a podcast. I had no idea. Computers were just then at that time coming into the forefront of things, and none of us in my age group, none of us had any clue what was going to burgeon forth and mushroom up from that. And of course, we all know now what we know.
Yeah.
For good or bad, we all know what we know.
Times are definitely changing. Platforms change along with that.
Yeah.
And I did just want to go back really quickly to what you said. You were only planning on working for the Eagle for about 3 years, but then you ended up working here for so much longer. How exactly did that happen?
It was forced slavery. No, I don't know. No, I'm joking. Please don't hate me, listeners. Well, all due respect, all kidding aside, my wife and I, when we moved here, we come from a town called Paducah, Kentucky, right about the same size as I think Gastonia. And of course, its claim to fame was the nuclear plant, which brought us all the atomic bomb. That's what my family worked in for decades, long before I came along, and like a lot of the plants around here back in the day, what am I trying to say here? The mill plants and things of that nature. Kentucky, Western Kentucky, Southern Illinois, Southeastern Missouri, they all had their own little niches in the marketing world, the manufacturing world. Western Kentucky's claim to fame was at that time, I think, the Union Carbide nuclear plant, which brought us, as I said, Fat Man and Little Boy, the Bobs. I hope I got that right. At least the components thereof back in the day. And it was all hush hush and very secretive. When you got a job there, you were making the best money in Western Kentucky that could be made literally anywhere in the 30s and 40s. Some of my family members had jobs there, but for the most part, many of them, they weren't highly trained. They just, I was happy to know that some of them made it through high school, because you're talking about a country agrarian economy, probably not too much different than what was like around here. And a lot of Tennessee, a lot of country folks in Western Kentucky are not too far removed from people, your average run of the mill, salt of the earth type folks. And that's where I came from. My dad was a car salesman until one day he decided he wanted to get into politics. And he was a handsome guy, had perfect teeth, and he was able to smile for a camera. And he became a judge, got elected as a judge, and the rest is history. I literally went to bed one night. I'm joking, of course, but I literally went to bed one night, poor as a church mouse, and got up the next morning. My dad was a super important person in that little neck of the woods. And, when you're in a small community, it's amazing what that will do for your mentality as well as your arrogance. You have to be real careful,
Oh, yeah.
especially when you're 4 feet tall, you get beat up a lot. So, if you run your mouth too much. But I'm just saying that I was very blessed, very fortunate. Never in a million years would have estimated that my dad would have been anybody important to me. In my mind, he was a car salesman. And it doesn't matter. I mean, I loved him because of who he was. He was my fishing buddy. He was all of that. My mother had a job at I think a local drug manufacturing company, warehousing company. And she really enjoyed what she did. But at the same time, she was very quiet. Didn't talk a lot, her father came over directly from Germany. He left Germany right before Hitler came to power, which was fortunate because I found out, I didn't know it then, but I found out later my grandfather had some Jewish heritage, and that probably would not have been good for him had he remained in pre-war Germany. He lost some family members, but we won't go into that. That's neither here nor there. It is what it is. I mean, we all have tales of loss in our families, for whatever reason. That was my mom's folks. My dad's folks were all originally from North Carolina by way of Virginia. The Powells. I mean, it's a fairly well-known name. I didn't care that much about it. Didn't know anything about it until I had an aunt who got into genealogy at some point. The next thing, that's very addictive, by the way. Be forewarned if you get into it. It's like running a vein almost. Next thing I knew, I was diving into that and traced my roots back to North Carolina. So when we arrived here in 2007, I made a joke around with my wife. I said, I will probably run into family members, and as sure as you can bet, I did.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. There's a guy over, his name is John Powell. I think he lives in Lincoln County. I'm not sure if he does now, but he did then. And when we were talking, ruminating one afternoon, just making conversation, he mentioned 2 or 3 people. And I thought, those names really sound familiar. So like a little weasel, I went back home and started running through all my stuff. And sure enough, there it was. And yeah, Lincoln County, North Carolina. I mean, small world. How can you make stuff like that up? And it wasn't a plan on my part to intentionally come here for that reason. I had no clue. My son and his wife and our daughter our daughter lives in Wilkesboro. We have family members up there that I didn't know about until she introduced me to them. Our son lives in Wake County, North Carolina right now. And of course, as luck would have it, that's where all my pals came out of. So what can I say? It's a small world after all.
It's
you
a
know.
very small world, absolutely, and you're right about the genealogy addiction. It does run pretty deep once you get
It's
started.
crazy. I told myself I wasn't going to do that because I thought that only little old blue hair people get involved in that. And then about 4 or 5 days into it, my wife said, "Congratulations." I said, "For what?" She said, "You're now officially a little old blue haired person." I said, "Thanks. Really appreciate it." But it is what it is. I don't mess with it anymore. I mean, I leave that for my son and his wife, and they're far younger than I am. They've got more time, more savvy about it. Of course, I'm to the point now, whenever he calls me, wanting to know about XYZ person and family, blah, blah, blah. And this part of Kentucky, what do you know about them? I'm like, nothing. And don't ask me. I don't know. And then after he hangs up, I'll call my relatives up there and go, "Hey, listen, what do you know about, And it's like, call him back and give him the skinny, the news. And he's like, I thought you didn't know anything. I said, okay, I lied. Relax, I lied.
You've got a innate, it seems, passion for investigating, whether that's through genealogy or through
Yeah,
your career in
I,
journalism.
I'm a nosy guy. And I think the way you said it, that's a nice way of putting it. I appreciate you saying it like that. That
Thank
made me
you.
feel good. But I've got a bad habit of sticking my nose in people's business, and I did that before I ever became a journalist because I think all of us here in the listening audience, everybody has if you're alive and breathing and on the other side of the dirt, you have an inherent want to know or a need to know. That's just human nature. And it can be from religion, want to know why we believe what we believe, to people who ask the stellar question, why are we here? What are we doing here? What's our purpose in life? And you can get into the isness of what is about that till the cows come home, as they say.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure that there's any really decent answers. I mean, yes, you can get very religious about it and say, well, God has all the answers. And I'm not saying he doesn't. I'm just saying that if you don't believe in God, like some people don't, uh, that pat tried answer is not going to handle everything. It's not going to explain everything to them. Um, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think people should always ask questions and be curious. However, sometimes you need to know when to shut the door and let it go.
So, when did that curiosity and innate desire to investigate and look into things a little deeper, when did that go over from being like a hobby into being your career? Why did you make that switch?
Uh, I tell you what, I wish I had a better answer for you than what I'm getting ready to give you, and I don't. But the best answer I can give you is that at some point in time, what was once a hobby can quickly become a, a profession if you want it to be. But the downside of that, the black part of that, the black aspect of that is that it can become an obsession
Mhm.
and completely engulf you and control you if you're not careful. It doesn't matter if it's journalism, it's whatever your passion is. You've got to be able to delineate and draw that line about this is my passion. I'll take it to this far and no farther. Because if you go past that line, then instead of you controlling it, it controls you. And you become its slave. I
Mhm.
hate to say it like that, but that's the best way I can think of it. That's how people get addicted to stuff. And you know as well as I do, there's people out there who are addicted to news. I've got a friend of mine right now who lives in Raleigh. I love him like a brother, but it's like every 5 minutes he'll text me, "Hey, did you hear about such and such in Cherryville?" Like, fool, I live in Cherryville. Yes, of course I've heard about it, And he'll want to know what I've heard. What can you tell me? And when I was involved heavily in journalism, especially during how can I put this pleasantly, the 2012
Mm,
situation here in town about
yes.
sadly, the police department. Um, this guy had, oh boy, I gotta be careful how I say this. This person had a few more intricate involvements at because at that time of how I was reporting on things, I couldn't just blurt out everything.
Mhm.
And his thing was he was always reading the Gazette. Gazette readers don't take this bad, but he was always reading the Gazette. There was a couple people there who would write things, and he would always compare what they wrote to what I wrote. And so he would play me by saying, "Man, your stuff is better than that." I'm like, "Look, I know I look kind of stupid, but really I'm not. It's not going to work. I can't tell you anything more than what I've already written. There's no point in belaboring the obvious and trying to drag it out of me because when I know, Cherryville will know. And if that sounds arrogant, I don't mean for it to. But you guys are in the business of journalism. I think you are. I believe you are.
Mhm.
I hope I'm saying this right. I'm not trying to be offensive, but I mean, when your followers and your fans want to know something, correct me if I'm wrong. I can't imagine them calling you guys up and badgering you or Mason or Rusty, because it would be pointless to do so. And
Mhm.
here's where I'm going with that. When you all know as journalists, then they will know. That's how I feel about it. That's how I have to roll. I think if you try to, in my way of thinking as a former professional journalist, if you color outside those lines, you're going to have a mess that you can't control after a certain point in time. That's my opinion. Um, I always had a mess. Anytime I tried to color outside the lines as an artist and as a dad, I try to stay on point. Now, I've got a couple friends of mine that would say, well, gee, Michael, because you're a screaming rightist conservative jerk, that's why you do that. That may be the case, uh, but not all the time. Sometimes you got to know what your parameters are, whether you're right, left, center, it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
You have to know what your parameters are. And especially as a journalist, whether it's in print or radio, TV, or radio, not radio, I'm sorry, podcast, you've got to be cautious and conservative. You have to err on the side of conservatism so that you don't consciously offend. Because while you want to be, somebody that can really put the pedal to the metal and expose things, while that may be the right thing to do sometimes it's not the smartest thing to do at the moment.
Mhm.
So what's the old saying? You got to pick and choose your battles. And
Yes.
you probably know that. I'm sure that you guys, Mason, all you guys know that, y'all have to do that on a daily basis. And ever since I've been here and from when I got out of college, even when I was in the Murray State News, one of the editors and writers there, even at a college level, you got to pick and choose your battles. You can't just go charging in the real world. I don't care what you see on television. You can't really just go charging in and, let the chips fall where they lie because at the end of the day, real people who have real emotions can be really hurt.
Mhm.
And you can't come back from that,
There's an ethical obligation.
obviously.
Absolutely.
Yes, ma'am. It sounds like you understand that.
I definitely try to, I'm a lot less experienced than you. I just
Ah,
graduated a couple months ago, but I've learned a lot in the past 6 months that I've been doing this job. And there definitely is that ethical obligation of,
yeah,
obviously everything needs to be factual accurate. And then timing is everything as
exactly.
well. And I
Especially
think,
timing.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that you working here in the Cherryville community, you were able to get a hang of that timing very well.
Uh, and if I may add to that,
Hmm.
you're correct. Yes, obviously. But and Rusty and I have talked about this in the past because uh, I've been very fortunate to know Rusty for quite a while. He's a great guy. And I'm just, to me, when I first moved here, it was important that I was able to make friends because I was like the little redheaded stepchild and the kid on the block, if you will, and I didn't know anybody here. And uh, I, I told my wife when we first moved here, I said, I do not want to go into this town and start messing things up and having a heavy hand or a heavy foot, if you will, from however you want to say it, and just offending people. Of course, my wife, God bless her, I love her, but she's like, well, that's going to be really hard for you. And I'm like, thanks. Thanks for the vote of confidence. So, but if she sees it, she's going to kill me in my sleep. But anyway, uh, I'm joking. At any rate, the point I'm trying to make is this: is that again, you've got to pick and choose your battles, and you got to be really careful how you approach people because at the end of the day, at the risk of sounding stupid, we're all neighbors and we're all friends and family, a larger part of the family.
Hmm.
We may not like all of our family members sometimes. I've got cousins right now that I would rather not see or talk to, but I love them because they're my family. We've been here for 17 years, and I'm not trying to be schmaltzy or silly when I say this, but I mean, we've grown to love this town, this community. I mean, there's people here that I would die for in a minute. Um, and that sounds goofy. And if it does, I'm sorry, but I make no apologies for that. I'm just saying that there's great people wherever you go, and you got to learn to find who they are and latch on to them and learn their stories. That's what you're doing right now. Not
Absolutely.
that mine is that interesting, but I mean, you've got to learn your stories, learn the people's stories. You know, and, I've been very blessed. I've been able to tell those stories, and for me as a journalist, that has always been. If you want to know what has driven me, uh, the ability to be able to tell people stories and let them tell their stories through me, as long as I tell them right
Hmm.
and factually, that I don't sugarcoat it. I don't add anything onto it. I don't insert myself into it. In my way of thinking, you may disagree, but in my way of thinking, that's what makes a true journalist. You can let them talk through you, and you don't insert yourself into that. Because when that happens, you don't have a story anymore. You have a biography about you.
Yeah. A fiction almost.
Bad fiction sometimes for my part. So.
And you've been here 17 years.
About that.
You've
Yeah.
seen a lot of different people come and go in the city, in businesses around here. With how long you've been here and the people that you've seen coming and going, the trajectory that Cherryville is growing, how do you see Cherryville being able to advance without an institution like the Eagle in town anymore?
Well, at the risk of sounding flattering to you guys or patronizing, I mean, the town is not without a responsible news source. And yes, by that, I mean Wise News Network. And again, I'm not trying to patronize you guys, but I'm just being honest about it. When he started this, I thought, wow, this is great.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, my boss was telling me, he said, well, that's going to be competition. I said, I'm not sure how you see that. I don't follow,
Mm-hmm.
And my boss is a sharp guy, or my former boss. He's a great guy, super fantastic guy. He's been involved in journalism in some form or fashion. He used to publish 5 newspapers. They were weeklies, but they were still, except for the Kings Mountain Herald. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a weekly too, isn't it? I believe, yeah. At any rate, Greg, my former boss, super guy, and I'm not saying to patronize him, just being honest about it. He's honest fellow, great boss. Uh, gave every one of the editors that we had at that time, myself included, a lot of leeway to handle our each individual entities as we saw fit. Now, if we got a little goofy or maybe started getting a little out in left field some way, he would whip out the old verbal lasso and rein everybody in, which that's what he should do as the publisher. In my way of thinking, I've worked for many publishers, and the best that I've ever had, one of whom was a Pulitzer Prize winner, by the way,
Wow.
NBC war correspondent in Vietnam.
Very impressive.
Oh yeah, he was he was something else. Yeah, Pax, he was they broke the mold when they made him, but not a good memory. Sorry, I'm kind of
Okay.
I'm off in another time frame. Greg, my former publisher, is one of those kind of guys. I mean, it takes somebody like that to see the big picture, because editors have while I may think I'm seeing the big picture, or thought I did, when you're zoning in on a community's heart, you're focusing on that heart and how it beats and how each individual in that community, how they become a part of that heartbeat. You know what I'm trying? Does that make sense? I hope.
I think that does. Yes.
Because if you can't relate to that, and you can't let that individual's heartbeat pattern become part of the whole, you don't have a story. And you don't
Absolutely.
really have a community, really, I don't think. I mean, I know that sounds kind of esoteric and kind of out there, but a lot of communities are disjointed in today's world because they don't really have anything that binds, and they don't have anything that pulls them together, unfortunately, except some kind of a horrible catastrophe. And we all, as human beings, we all seem to get pulled together whenever we had something, God forbid, that happens like that. Fortunately, Cherryville, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think they've had anything like that happen, and I pray to God they never do.
Yes.
But fortunately, again, for Cherryville, if such happens, they have you guys.
Thank
They
you.
may not have the Eagle, but that's irrelevant. I'm hoping and praying, and I believe they have. I think that the community has embraced WNN. which I think they should. And I'm not trying to. Rusty didn't pay me to say this, by the way.
He is not on the payroll.
Yeah. All kidding aside, I mean, what you guys do is, in my, and I hope I'm not offending you when I
Oh,
say
not
this,
at
but
all.
what you all do is the new manifestation for the younger folks uh, to what I did. Because let's face facts, print journalism is going the way of all flesh. At some point in time, yeah, I know there's people who will sit back and say, Michael, you're wrong. There's always going to be newspapers. Well, maybe. That's not my bag of tricks. That's not how I roll. I don't really have an opinion about that anymore. I might have had something about that, as recently as last year, but there's no point in belaboring the obvious or worrying about it. For individuals who can tap into RTV or any format of that nature or on computer, their news is right there for them. What I hope happens more as a former local journalist is that they will tap more into guys like you all than they will an overall place out of Raleigh or Greensboro or Charlotte. Nothing wrong with those places. It's just that they can't get into smaller towns like Cherryville and put their finger on the pulse of that town.
That don't get to know the community as well.
How can they? I mean, no disrespect, but how can they do that?
Absolutely.
And it's a rhetorical question, theoretically, but at the same time, not so much. I mean, you two guys right here, I've seen y'all in just the short time I've known you all. I've been very, if you'll allow me to say this, I've been very proud to be able to see you guys out there doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Because it makes me feel good to know that, when old guys like me are, pushing up daisies, it's going to be guys like you that are out there and others who will follow in your footsteps, assuming Rusty, continues on, which I hope he will, in some format, it doesn't need to die because you always need to be storytellers for the people that have stories to tell.
I completely agree. And I think
that's
that
copyrighted, by the way.
Trademarked.
Yeah.
And like I said, I agree. And I think that local news is so important. And people will always tune in to national news or even statewide news. But in your opinion, why is it so important for people to be invested in their local news and knowing what's going on in their specific community?
I'm not really sure there's a simple answer to that or one phrase answer, and I'm not going to bore the living bejesus out of you guys by waxing eloquent or in my mind thinking I am. But to me, the simplest answer, in my opinion, is that because there's nobody else that's going to let you tell their story. I mean, your platform is here. You have a platform. Cherryville, you have a platform. The Eagle might be gone, but the news platform in Cherryville is not gone. It's here. And again, I'm not trying to plug Rusty, but I'm just being honest about it. It's here with Wise News Network if people will take advantage of that. They have to do that. And the best way they can do it, and again, forgive me, you can cut this out if you want, but the best way to do that is to support it by buying ads or coming out whenever you guys have some kind of a thing going on, showing up, being there, being interviewed, letting people interview you. It doesn't matter if you're camera shy or not. It doesn't matter if you want to look like a movie star or whatever, because clearly I'm not. But I'm just saying, if everybody, and again, you guys know this. You and Mason both know that Rusty knows this. Everybody has a story to tell.
Oh, yeah.
Even dorks like me, we all have a story to tell. It might not be the most interesting story, but that's where you come in. You have to take that story and make it interesting.
Spruce it up a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Don't get too wild with it, but,
That's one of my favorite parts about the job. Like, I love the writing. I love to interpret. We were talking about this earlier, where you're kind of like a megaphone almost for other people's stories.
Right.
But a megaphone does more than just like make your voice loud. It makes it project and it puts it into people's minds more so than just like their typical voice. And so that's what I like to do with writing. Exactly. I sprinkle in some creative elements here and there. And I think that that's really important as well because it makes the news more engaging.
Right. The toughest thing when I first got into journalism a million years ago, it seems like now, but the hardest thing that I had to deal with was that I had to be very careful that I didn't interject my own, um, how can I put this nicely? That I didn't overweigh somebody else's story by interjecting my opinions about it. It's one thing, and I think you and I have had this conversation. I know, Rusty, and I've talked about it a few times in the past. It's one thing to write about something. It's quite another to editorialize or opine about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the age-old adage, east is east, west is west, and never the twain shall meet. The method behind that silly little phrase is that you've got to be careful, especially in journalism. And I think you and I have talked about this at a couple of council meetings. You got to be very careful in serious reporting of anything. If you were going to be a serious journalist, now I'm not saying you are, you're not. That's not my call. But for me, uh, I had to weigh how I was writing it,
Mm-hmm.
because the minute I started in, let's say, an article about the New Year shooters, the minute I started interjecting about something, whether I liked it or I didn't, is irrelevant. Which I do like it, by the way. But I'm just saying, um, I could have been a total jerk. I could have, when I first moved here, I could have said, "Hey, we don't do that in Kentucky.
Yeah.
Why are y'all out doing that? That's crazy."
Yeah.
But that's not my bag of tricks. That's not what needs to be heard. Doesn't matter if it's Cherryville or Dallas or whatever. The point I'm driving at is that I don't have a dog in that hunt because I wasn't originally from there. Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense. Yes.
Now, even though I've been living here for 17 years, and I've come to love what the shooters do and what they represent, because that's a tradition,
Mm-hmm.
and traditions, I hope everybody knows, and do not need to be tossed aside. I mean, it's like the heart of the community, in my opinion, but there's other traditions. Neither do they need to be tossed aside, like the museum, the historical museum. I don't want to get off on that, but I'm just saying, and I'm sorry, but I'm just being honest about it. One of my degrees is in history.
Mm-hmm.
I'm clearly not going to be for losing a town that was founded in the late 1800s. That's tantamount to insanity.
Yeah.
You don't go and just going, "Oh yeah, 100 years of history." You don't do that. That's asinine. It's futile, and it's also insane. Because the minute you do that, you got nothing left to stand on, in my opinion. You Paducah, from where I'm from, was founded in 1832. It was a river town. So what? Whoop-de-doo. But all the river traffic came up and down the Ohio River, just like the French Broad had river traffic back in the day. No doubt some of our ancestors made money off of that river traffic,
Mm-hmm.
good or bad. I'm sure I had a few ne'er-do-wells in my family who would steal a few things and shoot them down the river to, Cape Girardeau, Missouri. I don't know that for a fact, but at the same time, neither do I not know it. What's the point I'm trying to make here? The point is that we all have a history that we've got to embrace at some point in time, in my opinion. Because if you don't, what's the old saying? George Santayana, the famous philosopher, he said, "Those who don't learn from the mistakes of the past, you're doomed to repeat them." And that's not a made-up thing. That's the real deal. And if you don't learn how to grasp what you came from, how are you going to know where you're going?
I think that that's very wise. And I know you just mentioned the Cherryville New Year shooters. And recently they presented you with an award. And the city also just recently presented you with an award. How did it feel to get that recognition? I know we're not in this industry for the recognition, but did it feel like almost like it was like a finalized piece of your career, or?
Not really. I mean, I'm not a crier guy. You know what I mean? I don't get overly teared up about much of anything unless I bash my hand with a hammer, but that's just not my bag of tricks. I don't roll like that. I call my kids and ask them. They would come whining and crying to me about something they did. They thought I had no emotions. No, my son told me one time that I had no soul, and I'm like, whoa.
Wow.
Well, that's a little harsh, but at any rate, that's another story for another time. But the point I'm trying to make is that you've got to be as objective about things in life as you can. The minute you start getting too subjective on stuff, then you get too hard. You get too encapsulated. You narrow your search grid, if you will. You start reining in your fences. And if you can't keep pushing your boundaries and letting people into those boundaries and learning from them, then again, you're in my way of thinking, you're stagnating rather than going forward. And correct me if I'm wrong, since we've lived here, I've always thought of Cherryville as the little town that's always going forward. And I mean, how can that be a bad thing? How can it be wrong? So you got to be careful that in the process of doing it, though, that you're not overstepping your boundaries, that you're not stepping on people as you're making your boundaries. And I'm not a big guy. I don't. A lot of people nowadays like to use the words inclusive, diverse, and those are wonderful words. But at the end of the day, let me think. Oh yeah, just words. If you don't know what they mean, you're useless. I'm a wordsmith. You're a wordsmith. Any journalist worth his or her salt should be concerned about, in my opinion, should be concerned about the words they say, the words they write and speak. It's the same thing. In your situation, be careful. I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but be very wise and very wary about how you speak out. I mean, I had a bunch of buddies of mine that were radio DJs, and they'd get on there sometimes at night and just go crazy
Mhm.
because they thought they were the funniest guys in the room. Turns out they weren't, because they were hurting people's feelings. They were
Yeah.
messing things up. But they didn't care because they thought they were jocks. They were all just got out of college, a degree in radio, TV. Again, thought they were the smartest guys in the room, and they weren't. A couple of them paid the price for it. They lost their jobs. But that's neither here nor there. I learned from that mistake, and I learned that I have a better option because I can write what I'm going to say, and I can go back and look at it and go, that's kind of arrogant right there.
Hmm.
That's a little bit big-headed. I'm being a jerk right here, and fortunately, I was able to obviously delete that, get rid of it, erase it, whatever. When you're on the air or you're on live, and you guys know this as well as I do, there's no take backs. There's no do-overs. You can't stop and go, hey, I really didn't mean that.
Right.
Because at that point in time, your audience is going, are you really serious? Are you a serious journalist? Because if you do that, and you're not, then you've lost your audience. May as well hang it up and start working at the grocery store.
Yeah.
Or whatever. And nothing against grocery store work, but it's tough. That's like going back to performing on stage. We would be up there in front of thousands of people. And if you messed up one or two times, you can kind of joke around and laugh about it, I hit the wrong note. I broke a string.
Hmm.
But in real life, you can't do that with people's feelings and their emotions because you can't go and take it back. You can apologize till the cows come home, but the damage has been done. And what's the old saying? Words really do carry weight and they can hurt, written or otherwise.
Absolutely. And that is definitely something that as journalists, we have to be very cognizant of. Luckily, I think that we're both pretty good people, and so we're never trying to hurt people's feelings.
Well, gee, thank you.
But it is definitely a challenge that has to be
You're
overcome,
right.
and you have to learn it. Did you experience any other kinds of challenges that you had to overcome to succeed in this industry?
Well, the standard thing when I first got into it, of course, I don't know how your family members were, but my grandmother, God bless her, 100-year-old self at that time, was like, I think you're an idiot for doing this because you saw what happened to your cousin. He went into it, and now he's relegated off to some goofy paper in Louisville, Kentucky, and
Mm-hmm.
doing nothing. Well, you couldn't make a little woman who's grew up driving buggies to school, you couldn't make her understand that he was a bigwig in journalism in a large market city like Louisville, Kentucky. She had no clue. My grandmother, I love her and revere her memory, but she had not clue one that the Paducah Sun, which I think had about a 68,000 at that time circulation, was a tier 3 paper in the state of Kentucky. She was clueless that I was writing for magazines, that were fairly well known. I've had a couple of things published, like I think one or two articles in Southern Living. It's been a while. Of course, I've had more rejected, obviously. Than it's not easy, breaking
Yeah.
into magazine writer. It's not easy trying to get something published, even in your local paper. I had a friend of mine the other day said she had sent an article into the Charlotte Observer and was miffed that they didn't want to use it. Do I have any pull? And I'm like, let me think. No. What am I going to do? Call them up? Hey, you really need to do this. I can't do that.
Right.
They'll be, after they hang up, there'll be some busy laughing. They may have to take the day off. I'm exaggerating, but at the same time, most people don't have a clue what goes on in the world. And I don't mean this negatively, but they don't understand what it takes to do what I did or what you do. They don't understand that what it takes to do what Mason does or what Rusty is having to do, trying to get the WNN move it up the
Mhm.
ladder. Um, People who look at guys like Greg or my former publisher, Jack Paxton, may he rest in peace, had not clue one what it took to become a Pulitzer Prize winning cameraman in Vietnam.
Right.
They just thought he was over there hanging out with the camera. He was right in the middle of, some bad stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, a couple of times he almost lost his life. I won't go into that, but that's, when I first came, I was in college when I first met the man, and I was a non-traditional student, which literally means nothing more than I was an old guy and had a child when I decided to go back and polish off my bachelor's. All I had at that time was an associate's degree in underwater basket weaving or something crazy like that. I'm joking, but I think I had an AS in creative writing and maybe political science. It's something I'd have to drag it out and look at it. It's been some while now because I'm an old guy, but um, that the trade-off from having early college experience to when I went back to try to work on the bachelor's, I thought I'm going to be really cool about this and try to get my bachelor's and master's all at the same time
Mhm.
because I really wanted to teach in creative writing. That was my bag of tricks at that time. It's all I thought I could do and really all I wanted to do. I mean, I knew a little bit more about that than just try and hard journalistic writing than I did just sitting around twiddling my thumbs and doing nothing. I'm not a do nothing kind of person. I get bored to death sitting around. I mean, I told my wife one afternoon, she's sitting there watching television. She said, well, now that you're retired, you can sit home and watch TV. I said, no, I can't. And no, I won't. And she laughs at me because she hopefully is one of the three people in my whole life that thinks I'm humorous. But finally, she told me I was sitting around the house one afternoon after retirement. I think I'd been retired a whopping total of a week. And she's like, "No, you have something to do or someplace to go." And I'm like, "What? What'd you just say? Are you trying to get rid of me? What are you doing?" And then it dawned on me she's trying to be nice to me, like, "Get out of the house, go do something.
Yeah.
Don't vegetate." And I thank her for that, although I wish she could have said it a better way, you know.
Understandable.
But it is what it is.
There's a lot of intricacies in this industry, and I am fortunate enough to have just graduated from App State, like I
Right.
said,
It's
and
cool.
it's a really great school,
It is.
especially their journalism program. I could not speak higher about it.
Right.
And I knew a lot of really awesome students in the program who are young journalists about to embark into this industry.
Mhm.
Do you have any words of advice for young up and coming journalists who want to get into news?
First and foremost, don't expect that you're going to make $1 million right off the bat.
Oh,
I mean,
no.
and I'm saying that facetiously, but not so much. I can't begin to tell you, as an aside here, real quick, Appalachian State University, I hope I'm saying that right, began life like Murray State University. They were teachers' colleges,
Hmm.
and and anybody can feel free to correct me if they want, but I believe that App State, and I know Murray did for sure, began life obviously to teach teachers how to teach. Not that they didn't know how, and many of them, but you got to keep in mind that many of the mostly young women at that time, guys didn't even consider being teachers. I mean, some of them did, but not so much. Uh, when they came out of high school or what passed as high school in that day and time, the farthest thing from their mind, the ones that didn't want to be housewives would be happy as that. Who knew that being a housewife might not be a happy thing? The women who wanted a job, journalism provided a way for them to do what they love and be considered serious. And I hate to say it like that, not trying to be sexist, but I'm just being honest about it. Because when journalism for ladies came up, you had the Nellie Bly's of the world and the other ladies that were working within the framework of large major city newspapers.
Mhm.
And they basically were gophers. They did the grunt work. They would throw the little social stories at them. Hey, there's somebody's having a wedding over here at the Vanderbilts. Go cover that. And that's fine. On the surface of things, that's okay. But then you had the real Nellie Bly types in the world who wanted to get in and go, this cannery business up in Chicago, this is killing little kids.
Mhm.
And you had guys like Upton Sinclair who wrote The Jungle about that because he got in there and worked in that environment. And he came home one afternoon and thought, this is bad.
Yeah.
This is really bad. But had it not been for people like that, men and women, you wouldn't have had the changes that you had in America. So um, if you take that mentality and kind of extrapolate forward with it a little bit, you get the journalism schools that came out. You get a lot more young women going into it because it wasn't seen as a bunch of grunt work. It was seen as a noble, I think, profession. And then you still had a lot of the guys that, they might not have been the macho, I want to play football or basketball, or maybe they couldn't do that. Or they just didn't have any gumption for it. But, they could string a sentence together, you know. Then you had the doofuses like me that were artsy types who actually knew how to handle a single lens reflex camera. Don't ask me how I figured it out, but I did. And they would take me and plant me right in front of something and say, aim that way. And I took pictures and I got pretty good at it. That's not a brag, it's just a fact. Um, that actually, to be very honest with you, that plus my editorial cartooning, that's kind of what pinwheeled me into the writing aspect of it. And then, as I told you earlier, my late cousin Bill Powell in the Courier Journal asked me one afternoon why. I think he must have been drinking or something, but he said something along the lines of, why don't you write an editorial comment about XYZ that was happening at that time in Western Kentucky? Just send it in. The only reason that he wanted me to do that was because I think to get me out of his hair and to leave him alone. So I did. I banged out some cockamamie thing on a dam story. We got 4 or 5 dams up where I live. And I thought no more about it. It turns out, though, there was some ridiculous little turtle that lived in this area in watershed something something.
Mhm.
And I think, try not to laugh, I took a photo of the bloody thing and that got blown up major size and wound up in one of the larger papers in the state with my byline on it, and I mean, who knew,
Yeah.
and I didn't think anything else about it. And about 4 or 5 weeks later, I had one of my professors at the community college came in and had an envelope, threw it at me, and said, "Congratulations, you won a press award." And he went on and I think went to lunch. And I'm like, "Hey, cool, huh? What?" Well, when I opened it up, I won my first Kentucky Intercollegiate Press Award. Yeehaw! But it meant something to me. It meant a lot
Yeah.
to me. Like an idiot, I took it into Jack Paxton and flung it down in front of him and said, "I'm an award-winning journalist now." And he went, "That's great." That's it. I'm joking, but not really. You just had to know how Jack was. I was a little miffed that he didn't recognize how smart I was, how cool. But all kidding aside, your ego is here and the reality is right here. So you got to be real careful.
Mhm.
And once you learn how to gel those two and get them to kind of get simpatico and get a little closer to one another, then you can actually be good at what you do. I'm still trying to figure out if I'm any good at what I did. Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. I don't know.
If you think Michael was good at his job, comment down below. I'm kidding.
All right,
But I
555-1212.
I like what you said about how as journalists, we hold people accountable,
We do.
and I think times are changing. Things
We're
are
some
getting
of the few people
different.
that do hold them accountable.
Absolutely. Watchdogs of democracy. And that's what they always say. That's what I was taught.
And that's what it should be always.
Absolutely. 100%.
In my opinion.
What would your advice be to younger journalists who are getting into the industry, who maybe are feeling a little bit of fatigue from that? Because it's a hard job, but it is rewarding if you don't let the fatigue get to you.
To me. I thought I'd skirted it skillfully, but no.
No. You're totally fine. I was just specifically about how things are on a political scale in our country, and just not to get into the politics of it, but the inspiration and the motivation. How do you keep that fire alive even with the fatigue that it can sometimes bring?
Realize, and this is my opinion, love it or hate it, you've got to, as a young journalist, you've got to grasp the reality that every time a politician's lips are moving, he or she is usually lying. And that's a joke, sort of, but really not, because that individual is going to say what they need to say in order to get reelected or to move their policies, their platforms forward. And y'all can disagree if you want, but as I said, I'm almost 70 years old. I've had a bunch of friends of mine that were involved in politics in Western Kentucky. I love them to death as people. They're great. I'm able to be friends with some of the guys and gals around here. Also, fantastic people. And I'm not saying that they're liars. I'm not saying that at all. Would never intimate that. Nor would I, hopefully, nor would I think that they would think that I'm being serious when I say that. But I will say this. As a young journalist coming right out of college, be very careful about what you're being handed, because politicians / media hacks / PR people, they are going to spoon feed young journalists, newbies, if you will. They will literally spoon feed that individual or that organization with press releases, as you well know, that are going to be tailor-made, literally, to fit their agendas, whatever that agenda may be. It's your job as a journalist. I don't mean you specifically, but the new journalist, whoever he or she is, it's going to be that individual's job, and it ought to be their goal in life as a profession, in their profession rather, to weed through the gobbledygook, the doublespeak, the superfluous crap, pardon my language, to find out the kernel, the real truth of what the matter at hand is, and focus on that and keep bringing that forward to the fore. With politician XYZ skirts it again, journalist person should say, "Thank you, sir, but let's get back to my original question." Sometimes that's easier said than done, and that new journalist, whomever that person is, if you'll allow me to say this, he or she needs to find a way to trim his or her rhetoric, their verbiage, their skillful ability at writing. They've got to figure out a way to hone that skill, spoken or written, to always stay focused on the point at hand. What are you trying to get done? What do you want? What are you wanting to get across? That politician John Doe is a weasel. Okay, you can't come right out and say, this guy's a weasel. You have to let him say it for himself. You can't come right out and say that Susie Doe, who's a politician who's just trying to get started on things, who's probably not the best person for the job. You can't just say, she's a liar. She can't be trusted. You can't come out and say that. But that person, you can skillfully move things around verbally or otherwise, I think. I'm not saying you can do it on with an image. All I'm saying is that you've got to figure out how to ask the right questions. And with all due respect, my dear, if you can't do that, you or me or any journalist probably doesn't need to be doing this, because there's plenty of other people. I know from experience, a lot of people out there who are far smarter than I am. And all it takes for them is to listen to, especially if they're trained. I can ask question X, Y, Z. They can listen to it, the cadence of it, how I formed it. And if they're thinking quick on their feet, they can take the gist of it and spin it around and answer it in the way that they want, which has nothing to do with what I've asked. You got to be careful about that because you don't have, especially if you're kind of like Mason here or yourself, if you got a camera on somebody and mic shoved in their face. Again, like I said earlier, there are no do-overs when you're thinking on your feet.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to have everything up here, right here, up here, right here, right here, 16 inches from your head to your heart. And if those aren't in tune, you're not doing anybody any good. I don't mean you, but whomever.
Yeah.
You got to have your stock questions, And again, let me say this: the age-old thing of the who, what, where, when, why, and how. Those are great,
Mm-hmm.
and they're wonderful. But you've got to be able to move in and out of those things and know when to use the who, what, when, or the how. Which is the most important thing? I always told my students, when I taught some classes, in my opinion, the most important question is never the who, what, when, or how. It was always why.
Mm-hmm.
Why did John Johnson want to kill his wife? Why did Susie Bowe want to drive her car through a parking lot, running over a couple old ladies who were just pushing their shopping carts around? Why does anybody do anything? Well, the easy answer is because we're all human beings and sometimes we're stinkers. But that's a little too easy. That's a cop-out.
Mm-hmm.
Life is not that easy. It's not that cut and dry, which that's where you come in. You got to find out, why did Susie Johnson drive her car through a whole cadre of old folks just leaving the supermarket? Why did John Doe kill his wife? Why? What would it matter? Why is it important for guys like me or Rusty or Mason or any of us? Why is it important to report that? Because you want to know at the end of the day what impact will it have on somebody else. You don't want other people out there going, hey, if they got away with it, so can I.
Right.
Which I think, you may disagree, I think watching WBTV or anybody anymore, I'm afraid that's what's going on. It's like some of these larger towns, they've turned into the Wild West, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that it's really important that, kind of going back to like the local news and staying in tune with your local news organizations, it tells you more about your community.
Exactly.
And it tells you more about your neighbors and the people who are around you. And the more we all know each other, the more we get answers to those kinds of why questions.
You're right.
Do you have anything that you would like to say to the Cherryville community that has adopted you and has, for lack of a better term,
that's the truth,
and who has embraced you and learned to love you as you've been here? Any final parting words from your position as editor at the Eagle?
First off, I can't say thank you enough to everybody. I mean, I thank you for taking a little short, fat journalist guy and his wife in who aren't from here and literally embracing us as if we were, as the late, I won't call her name, but a woman from here who I dearly loved. I don't know if this is the right word, but she came in one day and the last thing she said on the way out, she said, "Congratulations, Michael. You're now a native Cherryvillian." And I was like, "What is that?" No, I'm joking. But it meant a lot to me. And I saw her later downtown and I thanked her for it. I got to thinking about it though. I mean, there was no reason for anybody to embrace us. I mean, like I said, we were in for 3, out for 3, or so we thought. I even had a friend of mine who's a pastor in town here. He said, you're probably going to be like some of the pastors around. You're going to be in for 3 and then out. And I'm like, thanks. I appreciate that. Thanks for that great vote of confidence. But I love him like a brother. So we laughed about it. Mm-hmm. Well, 17 years later, every now and then I'll see him and I'll go, "I'm still here." And he kind of laughs and he says, "Good job." That's
3
all
more years.
Yeah. 3 more years. But I to answer that question, I have to say sometimes thank you doesn't seem to be enough. Susan and I, my wife, we thank everybody in Cherryville from the bottom of our hearts, obviously. I mean, the people here have embraced us, I feel like, within reason, taken us to heart, and they've put up with my rumblings and ruminatings in my little column. Um, and I I appreciate that more than you can ever know. But even more so, being made to feel a part of the community means far more than just being the editor of that community's paper. Uh, that means that we have a place here, whether we stay or we go, which I don't think we're going to be going back to Kentucky anyway soon. Uh, no reason to really. My wife's family, her mom is here now, and she loves it. As I said, I've got 6 grandchildren. They all live in the eastern part of the state and mid part of the state. And I see them anytime I want to. They come down here and pester. I'm sorry, they come down here and hang out with me. I want to edit that word out of there. And that's if somebody told me that I'd be living in a small town in North Carolina, I would have told them they were crazy. There's nothing wrong with it. Don't get me wrong. I did not see myself ever leaving Paducah, Kentucky, because my imagination is not that broad. It's not that great. I've been fortunate. I've lived in London, England, New York, Chicago, L.A. I'm not for any great length of time. I lived in Jerusalem. What am I saying? Tel Aviv. I had an apartment in Tel Aviv, Israel, right on the Mediterranean. And that's a lot of fun. That was great. And I was younger. I was doing something completely different than this, and got to meet some amazing people. Got to do some amazing things, and um, I miss that aspect because I'm a musician. I'm probably, and try not to. I know there's going to be some of my musical buddies out there that if they ever hear this, they'll be laughing their rear ends off. But I'm probably a better musician than I am a speaker or a writer. I'm probably a better songwriter than I am a commentary writer. But music has always been my life. I mean, that was my thing. Uh, I'm not the greatest guitar player in the world, but I'm not bad. That's not a brag, and I'm not trying to sound arrogant. I just know what I can do. It's like an electrician, knows what they can do, and they're really good at what they do. Otherwise, if they don't, well, they could die.
Yeah.
And that's not trying to be mean. I'm just saying, it's a serious job. As a Christian rock musician back in the 70s, we took what we did very seriously. We might have looked like a bunch of goofy long-haired freaks, but I mean, we took what we did very seriously. As I said, we got to utilize that and witness to other people. And that took off, believe it or not, through Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay.
Who knew? When Susan and I fast forward years, decades down the road, when we had the chance to come back, we jumped at it. Because, I mean, bottom line, some great people here. And that's the best way I can say it.
There really are.
Good people, great people. It's a great state. And I'm not trying to blow anybody's head up. I'm just being honest about it.
I think that if you take yourself seriously, then other people will have a way easier time taking you seriously, and no matter what it is.
Yeah, I hope so. I don't know if I don't want to take myself too seriously. Yeah, I know what you're saying. I miss performing. I miss being able to sit down and I hate this word jam with other musicians, but like I said, I'm 70 years old, and I can't just call some of the younger guys up and say, "Hey, I'm bored. Let's get together and do a little picking." I'm not saying they wouldn't, but they have lives too. They also, a couple of fellows that I know they're professionals in and of their own right. They're traveling, they're on the road, making money, making their own stories, making their own life, and they're bloody good at what they do. They're very good at what they do. I'm thinking of a couple of people right now that I hope and pray to God, and I wish nothing but the absolute best for them going forward. I hope they become as famous as they ever want to be. And I'm happy that things are doing well for them. There's a few others around in this area that are maybe not as talented as these 2 individuals I'm thinking about, but they're not far from it. And as a musician myself, and who's had some success, got to play for some important people, well-known people, because like I said, we were a bunch of crazy little long-haired kids from Kentucky that were just out there having a good time. We were doing what we felt God wanted us to do. And our bag of tricks, mainly at that day and time, for that aspect of my life, was to witness for the Lord, if you will. I can't think of a better way to say it. We were like an evangelical Christian rock group, because at that day and time, that was the going thing.
Hmm.
Christian music today is a lot different than what it was when we first got into it. Uh, I listened to some of it. One of my guitar students was Stephen Curtis Chapman, who at that time, him and his brother Herb, I used to get tickled at it when their dad would bring them in, because you could tell they didn't want to learn how to play anything. They just want. He would drag them in and drop them off and go, "They're yours for about 30 minutes. Good luck." You drive off and like, help, but they learn. And the
Yeah.
point I'm trying to make is that Stephen Curtis Chapman now is a Grammy Award winning musician for Christian music. Did I have a hand in that? Probably not, but it's irrelevant. I'm glad that I got to help out a little bit. I think he may have had a whopping total of maybe 2 or 3 lessons. His little brother, God bless his 2 large front teeth, he tried to get him to sit down and stay still long enough. At that time, I was not a dad.
Hmm.
Okay, so it wasn't like I could sit down and knew how to handle a kid like that. But you do the best you can, And most of the kids that I taught, they wanted to be serious musicians. They just didn't know how to go about it. And I had a little bit of a different way of teaching music than your average guys. A friend of mine and I were talking a little while back how he teaches guitar. And I was kind of laughing, making a joke about it. I said, I would never have done anything like that. And he asked me, why not? I said, mainly because I don't read music that fast, number one. And number two, if I want to get somebody's attention, when they see me play, they want to know, how do you do that?
Hmm.
And they want to jump right into thinking they can play hard rock and roll right off the bat. And I've been doing this for like 30 plus years. It's like my son, he couldn't figure out why he couldn't just sit down and pick up a guitar and play like the old man. So first off, you're not going to play like me because you're not me.
Hmm.
And I can't teach you how to be me. Frankly, honestly, I don't know that I'd want to. The world doesn't need another Michael Powell.
And you have to have your training wheels before you know how to ride.
Pretty much. And I pretty much yanked mine off early on because I was a rebel without a clue. So,
Yeah.
And still am.
Well, Michael, thank you so much. I really wish you the best during your retirement. Hope you get back to playing some music. It seems like that's what you're really passionate about.
I tell you, I have a lot of fun sitting. I've got 8 guitars. I sit around and look at them. I'll pick one up every now and then, plug it in, and cause the neighbors a lot of distress.
I'm sure they like listening to it.
I don't know. When you start making the dog howl, that's when you need help.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming on. For the Wise News Network, I'm Grace Smith.